When I first began doing voter registration, I was really shocked by how many times I would meet people who would tell me, I would love to vote, but I had lost that right because of a felony conviction. It happened over and over. And every time I began to explain the Florida clemency process to these people, I would soon find that I was speaking to more than one person, because someone would hear what I was saying and they would come over and they would say, oh, I have to hear this because my brother or my sister or my friend or my son is in the same boat. Well, let me tell you, it is a very big boat. It holds 1.6 million Florida citizens. There are 13 million registered voters in Florida and 1.6 million people who have lost their right to vote. It's a staggering injustice, something that Florida, as in so many ways, has a very special spot. We're about the worst in the country on this regard. And that is why I'm happy to introduce our keynote speaker, Roderick Kemp. So Rod is the guy who many of you actually know. He volunteers to knock on doors in political campaigns. He's a realtor who went through Leadership Broward. He served on local civic boards. He's a father of 3 adult children, a grandfather of 2. When I had lunch with him the other day, he was really proud to show me photos of this wonderful destination wedding that he had just been to for his son in Costa Rica. He's your neighbor. But Rod Kemp lost his right to vote. And Rod is now leading the organization in Broward County to the effort to gather signatures to get on petitions to have a constitutional amendment on the 2018 ballot that would automatically restore the rights to vote for convicted felons. It's a cause that the League of Women Voters has embraced over the years, and in wonderful timing, 2 days ago, the Florida Supreme Court approved this petition, and now is the hard part. 700,000 signatures to get this on the ballot in 2018. Rod's story was the subject of a 2016 documentary by the Florida Center for Investigative Reporting, and it sort of tells his story. His is an unusual story, actually. It's not typical, and he's going to share that story with you now.
Good afternoon, League of Women Voters. It's an honor to be invited to be your keynote speaker. For us men, no matter how big our head gets, running companies or even trying to run countries or being the head of the household, we know who's really in charge. The women who nurture us, it's the women who nurture us and our compassionate force that keeps us encouraged and motivated. How's that old James Brown song go? It's a man's world, but ain't nothing without a woman or a girl. First, I also like to start off with my mother being a breast cancer survivor and me being a recent survivor. I'd like to acknowledge any other survivors in the room today. So what is the right to vote? Well, according to human rights advocates seek to ensure that the right to vote is guaranteed to all citizens as mandated by international law. The right to vote is a basic human right that empowers citizens to influence governmental decisions and safeguard their other human rights. Free and fair elections help to prevent war and bloodshed and allow for peaceful transition of power. The constitutional right. What is the most important right granted to a U.S. citizen? The correct answer, according to the U.S. government, was the right to vote. But that right has always been on shaky ground. Just as the Constitution once countenanced slavery, it also allowed voting to be restricted to property-holding white men. The 13th Amendment expunged the stain of slavery, from our basic law, but the Constitution has never fully, completely fulfilled that democratic process that we associate with it. Because the qualifications to vote are decided by each state, as we all know. But amendments to the Constitution have required equal protection, eliminated the poll tax, and made it unconstitutional to restrict voting based on race, sex, and age for those over 18. For years, the Supreme Court relied on these amendments to expand the franchise and the broadening of the voting rights, which was associated with the Civil Rights Movement and was widely accepted as a marker of progress for a just society. But of course, in more recent history, in an environment of increasingly rigid partisan loyalties, controlling who votes offers more leverage than trying to persuade voters to change their minds, and thus access to the ballot itself has become an arena of intense political debate. Such is the case as when we look at the numbers of those, as Bonnie mentioned, who cannot vote here in the state of Florida. It's one of the highest in the nation. So my story. Well, for as long as I can remember, in one form or another, I have been exposed to or involved in the political process or in community involvement, along with the other pillars of my existence, which is family, work, and hobbies. The first experience I can remember, I had to be about 12 or 13 years old, and the lady next door who used to watch out for me after school kind of became my surrogate mother. And she always had something going on. Her sons had a paper route. She did part-time catering. And one day we got home from school, and she said, "Boys," she had a stack of leaflets. She said, and there were leaflets because it was the governor's race in California. She said, "I want you to go out door to door and don't come back until they're all gone." So you see what I mean about women and being in charge? And then there was my father and my stepmother. They loved to entertain, and they were always having gatherings at our house. And at some of these gatherings, local elected officials would show up. And even on one occasion, the legendary Julian Bond was at our home. So that left quite an impression on me. Fast forward, I met a girl. She was from here. Got married, and I moved to Florida. After about a few years of getting settled, I kindled a friendship with a local elected official. He was our city commissioner. And I used to shadow him to different events and stuff just to learn what was going on in the community. And before I knew it, I was appointed to a beautification board, citizen review board, and I became the first African American chair with the city charter revisions board for the city of Fort Lauderdale. And then along the way, I also went through the Leadership Broward program. I'm a proud Leadership Broward alumni, as Bonnie mentioned earlier. And through my career, I had honorable mention in Black Enterprise magazine. I've been interviewed by Sun Sentinel, the Miami Herald. I did a few radio talk show interviews. And in the 2008 presidential election, I dived in head first. And again, in 2012, volunteering and taking part in fundraising activities and events. I also became a campaign manager and treasurer in both the municipal and county race, eventually learning how to form my own PAC, a political action committee, where I was chairman and treasurer for a local race. And again, was appointed this time by the vice mayor to the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee in the city of Fort Lauderdale. In the midst of all of this, in the summer of 2015, I received a letter from the supervisor of elections that I had been removed from the statewide voting registry. And Dr. Snipes could attest to that because I kind of tugged her coattail one day at a luncheon. We were standing in line in the buffet line. I look up like, "It's Dr. Snipes." "Yo, we need to talk. I don't understand what's going on here." But she was very gracious and followed up, and we communicated back and forth, and she explained to me what goes on. And what happens is, of course, out of Tallahassee, they send out, the list, and all the supervisors of elections have to follow that list and send out notices. So anyway, I was shocked and bewildered because the reason they stated was for conviction that happened 30 years ago. And I don't want to say how many years it's been that I've been voting. It's been a long time. But I have been voting ever since I was of the legal age to register. So, the clock just stopped, and it really took me by surprise. And I was thinking to myself, wow, they went back that far to find out or to send me a notice? And back then, I had specifically asked, once I paid my debt to society, I'm done, right? And the answer was, yes, it's all over. You can go on with your life, which I did. And I just explained to you how my life has been. And truthfully, I had totally lived that incident as if it was non-existent, because I just completely forgot about it. And, and really all of us have a right to live our lives moving forward. As they say, when you get married 10 years down the road, you're not married to the same person you married 10 years ago. We all change, we're all evolving, and we're all growing. But it just goes to show the way things are set up, that there is no reasonable or consistent method of who gets their rights revoked and who gets their rights restored. There's no set standard. It always changes. And I know what people think because I've been guilty of it too. And that is, they think people who have their rights taken away are drug dealers, thugs, sex offenders, and so on. Well, the truth is, many are nonviolent offenders, and the following examples are just some of the uncommonly known reasons how people can lose their voting rights. Releasing balloons. Yes, you heard right. A few years ago, a gentleman released some heart-shaped helium balloons as a romantic gesture to his girlfriend. He was charged with polluting to harm humans, animals, and plants under the Florida Air, Water Pollution, and Control Act. A crime that most likely occurs every day in the state of Florida, because right up the coast from where this incident happened, there's a place called Disney World, who sells helium balloons on a daily basis. So you have to ask yourself, if a child who intentionally releases a Mickey Mouse balloon is a felon, well, it's a third-degree felony, folks. And he released the balloons 1.5 miles from an animal refuge, possibly endangering animals. Go figure that one out. And it is punishable up to 5 years in prison. But he didn't willfully violate the law, you might say. But the Florida Supreme Court has said that doesn't matter. The Naples Pier. 14 people were caught by Naples police one summer trespassing the pier, which had been under renovation and construction. Trespassing on a construction site, if you don't know, carries a felony charge. One person said it was his birthday, he just wanted to take a stroll. Some claimed they didn't see the signs, others admitted it, and they entered the construction area by other means because the fence itself didn't extend all the way out to the sand with concern to wildlife. And I can't tell you how many times have many of us walked by a construction site. I know I have, especially if it's in your neighborhood, you're gonna be nosy. You see a house under construction, you're like, I wanna see what this house is gonna look like when they're done. Another example, a person who I met recently at our retreat is a college student. And she told the story of how she was struggling to finish school. She just wanted to finish school. And it was the last semester, and the school said, well, your last semester tuition is due. And she came from a background where the family didn't really have the financial worthiness. And desperate and wanting to finish school, she didn't know what else to do, so she wrote a check. not thinking about what the consequences were, and that I'll make good on the check down the road. Well, she graduated, got her a job, was driving a company car, and her grandmother, you know, as I say, the check is in the mail, you know, the timing was all off. Her grandmother, once finding out, you know, that her granddaughter had written a bad check, had made good on the check, but the timing was off because it just so happened before that could get cleared, one day she was in the gas station and a Florida trooper happened to run her plates. They detained her right on the spot, processed her. She had to go through the jail system, and they took away her rights. Not only that, other consequences. She lost her job and so forth. And eventually was released about 30 days after that. So these are all uncommonly known instances, and it goes to show at the core that restoring voters' rights is a nonpartisan issue. Because when you think about there being about 1.6 million Floridians, everybody in Florida and everybody in this room is impacted in one way or another by an immediate family member, a distant relative, or a close friend, with the way things are set up right now. So, my story was told in a documentary last year. It was produced by the Florida Center for Investigative Reporting and released nationwide online in October 2016 through TimeMagazine.com, The Atlantic, MoveOn.org, and other media outlets. The cat was out the bag. Many people who have known me as the person I previously described now knew about my past. But you know what? It was actually liberating. For the first time, I faced the fears of being exposed and understood that it happened for a reason. To be standing here before you talking about how important it is for Florida to change its laws. Just as shocked as I was to lose my voting rights, this past February in a letter dated sometime in January 2017, the Governor's Executive Clemency Board reversed their decision and they restored my voting rights. And no doubt in my mind, it probably was as a result of the exposure of the film and, you know, there being several newspaper articles and radio interviews with the director and the producer. The letter stated my rights are fully restored with the exception of not being able to own a gun. Who cares about a gun? I get to vote. So you may be asking where we are now in the effort to help 1.6 million regain their rights to vote. Well, Bonnie kind of touched on that earlier. I am a member of the Florida Rights to Restoration Coalition, by default, obviously, and here speaking on their behalf. It's an organization and movement that is a group of 70 plus national and statewide and local entities that includes you, the League of Women Voters. We have chapters throughout the state that are being built out, and a chapter including here in Broward, which I'll be part of and heading up. In spearheading this efforts, it's not only just about voting. You know, it's more about also too having the basic right to exercise their voice at the polls, but also to have the ability to seek gainful employment again, to get housing when they fill out an application, to be able to serve their community as I have had the privilege to do when being appointed by an elected official. And it is an integral part of what makes up your identity. You know, it's part of your citizenship. And as mentioned earlier, we've reached a major milestone, and that is only 3 days ago, the Florida Supreme Court unanimously approved the wording to restore voters' rights to be on the ballot next year for 2018. So the answer to the question is we just got to get to the finish line, folks. And that would require about 700,000 petitions. Now, that seems like a big number, but when you think about chapters throughout the state and all the organizations and everything, you can break that down into bite-sized pieces. There is Desmond, who heads FRRC, told me there was a group of people that are already collecting petitions right now, and they just collected 3,000 on their own. I mean, they're just out there just doing it. They're killing it. And also, too, you can go to the FRRC website. It explains who we are and what we do. And so we need you, we need your family members, we need close friends, and anybody else you know that has been impacted by our laws and need our laws to be changed. Also, too, most importantly, is donations. As all of us know, being involved in politics, things cost money, and we have the ability to do sustaining contributions, $5, $10 a month. I know I spend more than that every day I go to Starbucks. and I like to use my app because I like to score my points to get free drinks. But to do the sustaining contribution or to make a donation, the site that you actually go to is not ours. It will be FloridiansForFairDemocracy.com. And if you don't have a pen and paper right now, Bonnie said that she will email that link out to you folks. Yeah, she'll put it on the website.
I'll put links for all of this on the website.
And as far as any other organizations today, like the Caribbean Bar Association and so forth here, if you'd like, I'll give you my 24-hour voicemail number. It is 954-356-5407. That's 356-5407. So that's my story, folks, and I hope that you have an understanding of where things are right now. And this is one of the most pivotal moments in Florida's modern history that we are currently experiencing. So let's make history. And again, thank you.